I bet you can all see me now. Hey, sorry about that. I am 10 minutes late because we did not go live. All right. Well, welcome everyone. I just did 10 minutes of talking and realized we were not live yet, which is fantastic. So I'll start over. My name is Patrick Stewart, and today we will be having a lesson in Taoism. To do that, we're going to go through or continue going through this book, which is 365 Tao by Dingming Tao. This book is a daily meditation guide. Every day, you're supposed to read one chapter and then think about it, study about it, and take that day to just contemplate what you learned. And then the next day, you go to the next one. So for those who may not know, Taoism is a 2,500-year-old ancient Chinese religion, philosophy for the Westerners. It was developed legendarily by a man named Lao Tzu. Lao Tzu was on his way out of the kingdom. He was done. He didn't want to do it anymore. Lots of wars and corruption and wise men trying to trick the emperors into doing things that maybe weren't the best for the kingdom. So on his way out of the kingdom, a guard stopped him and asked him to write down wisdom. And he wrote 81 poems, chapters, if you will, and that became the Tao Te Ching. So over the last 2,000 years or so, there have been several other books and texts about Taoism. And this gentleman, Dingming Tao, decided to take a lot of these concepts and apply them to modern day life, in the 21st kind of century modern day life. So here we are. This is week 2. Every week, we'll go through a couple of different chapters. We'll go on here for about 45 minutes or so, maybe over an hour. And I hope you enjoy. All right. So chapter 8 is called Work. Work. The woodcutter works in all seasons. Splitting wood is both action and inaction. When it is snowy, the woodcutter must split wood. Unless he does, he and his family will not stay warm, and those who depend on him will not survive. But the woodcutter does not work simply on a piecemeal basis. He labors in concert with the seasons. He works hard to store wood prior to the first cold, so that he would have the luxury of merely splitting kindling now. His work seems slight in one season because he was industrious in the previous one. When he splits wood, he must place the log on the block and raise his axe. But he must strike the wood with the grain, and he must let the axe fall with its own weight. If he tries to chop across the grain, his effort would be wasted. If he tries to add strength to the swing of the axe, there would be no gain. Like the woodcutter, we can all benefit from working according to seasonal circumstances. Whether it is the time or the method, true labor is half initiative and half knowing how to let things proceed on their own. So this chapter brings up a concept called Wu Wei. Wu Wei is a Chinese term. It's spelled, in English, it's spelled W-U space W-E-I. I prefer the translation of effortless action. A lot of times you'll see it translated as inaction or no action. Now, that other translation brings up a lot of problems because you get questions like, well, what if someone attacks me? Am I just supposed to sit there? Am I just supposed to be like, man, that's the course of nature. Whatever happens, happens. Come and steal all my stuff. Well, no, it's not quite the correct interpretation. What it means is performing an action, but effortlessly. So in this example, we take a woodcutter. I don't know if any of you have ever chopped wood before with an axe, but it is very difficult if you don't know what you're doing. In fact, it's rather painful. Your shoulders will hurt, your arms will hurt, your hands will hurt. If you don't cut with the grain, the axe won't chop. If you put too much power in it, then you're just wasting energy. When you do it correctly and when you're skilled at it, it feels almost as if the weight of the axe is doing all the work for you in conjunction with the blade, with the grain of the wood, with your speed. It's all very effortless. As long as you go with that natural kind of task, right? You just let that axe do its job and you're just there to swing it. But the axe, that's doing the cutting. Here at the end, you'll notice it says, like the woodcutter, we can all benefit from working according to seasonal circumstances. So sometimes we need to work very little. And if we work more than that, it's wasted energy. It's energy that's not going towards accomplishing your goal. If you're in other seasons, you need to work and put in a lot of effort. Now, the fruits of that labor may not appear then. It may appear later. Like, again, going back to the woodcutter, he has to plant his trees and work very hard to grow these trees and raise them in the spring to get them to be healthy so that when he goes to chop them down, he can effortlessly have healthy trees that he can chop up into wood. And again, going back to that effortless action, wu wei, that doesn't mean you do nothing, right? That means all that you do comes very naturally, comes very effortlessly. Another example I always use is Michael Jordan. He was interviewed a long time ago when he was winning championships left and right. They asked him, well, how do you do these things? Like, how do you keep hitting these game-winning shots? Like, how do you keep scoring all these points, right? You just seem to be so much better than everyone, and it just doesn't even look like you're trying. And he said he didn't know. He just did. He was, quote, in the zone, right? We hear that term a lot, especially growing up here in the United States. And I'm in Texas, so sports are a big part of how we're raised, unfortunately, here. But yeah, you can reach a mental state where even though Michael Jordan was the greatest basketball maybe of all time, or especially of that age, it just seemed like it flowed out of him naturally. I've seen studies done on sharpshooters and archers that when they're getting their gun ready or their bow and arrow ready, they have all these diodes hooked up and maybe they're nervous and their heart's beating and their breath is, really going. And when they take aim, everything slows down. Their heart rate slows, their breathing slows, their concentration goes up. And when they release, then everything returns back to normal. So for that brief moment, they had reached that that state of Wu Wei. And we can all do that. We can all live in that moment. And according to Taoists, you can live your whole life that way. Not at the beginning. It's something that I obviously have not ever come close to. But I think we can all learn to do effortless action in some way, shape, or form, whatever it is, whether it's doing dishes, or it's sweeping the floor, or it's drawing, or reading, or taking a walk, or sitting still and meditating. You can find an action that you are performing that comes so effortlessly that it doesn't feel like you're doing anything. And that is Wu Wei. That is the kind of Wu Wei that you and I can experience every day. All right. Moving on. Chapter 9. Optimism. Clearing blue sky, a promise in bare branches. In winter, there are sunny days. In adulthood, childhood can return. In winter, all things appear dead or dormant. The rain and snow seem incessant. The night's long. Then, one day, the sky clears to a brilliant blue. The air warms. The mist rises from the earth, and the perfume of water, clay, and moss drifts through the air. Gardeners are seen preparing new stock, though they are only bare branches and a gray root ball. The people are optimistic. They know that there will be an end to the cold. In adulthood, we often see responsibilities as something dreadful. Why should we dig the ground when the weather is disagreeable? We see activities only as obligations. We strain against our fate, but there is joy to working in harmony with the proper time. When we do things at just the right occasion, and those efforts bear fruit later, the gratification is tremendous. There was an old man who began an orchard upon his retirement. Everybody laughed at him. Why plant trees? They told him that he would never live to see a mature crop. Undaunted, he planted anyway, and he has seen them blossom and has eaten their fruit. We all need that type of optimism. That is the innocence and hope of childhood. So in the Tao Te Ching, there are a couple of verses that talk about childhood and wanting to find or return to or childlike state. Now, this is tricky. Again, it leads to interesting questions like, well, am I just supposed to give up everything? Am I just supposed to, leave my family and my job and be like a kid where I just don't have any responsibilities and I just I just eat trash everywhere and, do you really want me to be a kid? Because I have those that live with me and I probably don't want to go back to that. Right. And if you've ever taken care of children, you definitely know what I'm talking about. But nope, that's not what they're talking about here. The innocence and hope of childhood is the key phrase there at the end. So again, just like in chapter 8, we see the need to follow certain paths at certain times, right? That we need to be open to these changes, just like a child is open to the direction of their parents, their teachers, right? They do what they are told for the most part. As an adult, we lose that sense of innocence, right? We lose to be accepting of new ideas. A child is very accepting of new ideas because they don't have that life experience to counteract the opinion that is being told to them. In fact, there's this great study that's done every 4 years in the United States. Whenever it's the presidential election, they ask children who they think is going to win the presidential election. And these are usually very young children. Typically, they correctly predict the winner. I think almost every year, except for maybe like once or twice over the last 40 years, they have correctly predicted the president or who's going to win, because they are accepting and influenced by the opinion of their parents. They are innocent. So too are we supposed to be as adults, even when things don't go our way. Right here in chapter 9, it talks about the weather being disagreeable. When it's cold and harsh, the people knew that one day the cold would go away and it would be spring again. So too are we to be hopeful and optimistic that new circumstances will arise. Just like as a child, when you get in trouble, you know that that's not the end of the world. You can cry it out. You go pout in your room. You come out, have dinner, right? Go play with your friends. Tomorrow's a new day. You wake up and it was like nothing ever happened. My family was really good at this. Even today, we can get into very heated disagreements. And within moments, it's like we just move on. When my wife met my family for the first time, or heard us argue for the first time, she was kind of shocked how quickly we just didn't care. It just didn't matter because we were family and we were going to move on. That's what this chapter is talking about. Having that optimism, having that childlike innocence and hope that we lose pretty often as we grow older. All right. On to chapter 10. Disaster. Ugh, man. This is going to be a good one, guys. Mute black night, sudden fire, destruction. Dun, dun, dun. Disaster strikes at its own time. It is so overwhelming that we can do nothing other than accept it. It alters the course of our days, our work, our very thinking. Although it is tempting to resent disaster, there is not much use in doing so. We cannot say that a disaster had malice towards us, though it might have been deadly. And it's hard to say that it has wrecked, quote, our plans. In one stroke, it changes the very basis of the day. Disaster is natural. It is not the course of the gods. It is not punishment. Disaster results from the interplay of forces. The earthquake from pressures in the earth. The hurricane from wind and rain. Even the accidental fire from a spark. We rush to ask why in the wake of a great disaster, but we should not let superstition interfere with dispassionate acceptance. There is no God visiting down destruction. Disasters may well change us deeply, but they will pass. We must keep to our deeper convictions and remember our goals. Whether we remain ash or become the phoenix is up to us. All right. So, this, I think, might be one of the hardest lessons to learn, at least it was for me, in Taoism. I think in the West, we're taught that everything has a reason, or we're taught that, justice will be served always, right? In the end, the bad guy will get what is coming to him, at least when we're kids, and we all believe it, right? We all bought into that. The villain in every movie and every book and every, cartoon we watched, like he always lost in the end and the good guy always won. And I mean, you can go in the movie theater and watch like really any superhero movie and the bad guy always loses. It may take a sequel or two, but in the end, the good guy always wins. And it makes you feel good. And you leave that movie or you leave that cartoon when you're a kid and you're like, man, yes, this is how it's supposed to be. This is how it is. And then a disaster strikes, an earthquake happens, a tornado happens, especially here in the South. Maybe where you live, it's a monsoon season, or a fire breaks out, or a car wreck happens, right? Something. And you think, what was the point of that? Like, why? Like, why did that happen to me or my loved one or to my friends? Like, what did they do to deserve that? And then you come to the conclusion, well, they did nothing. So I guess the world is just unjust, right? That the world hates people and the universe is out to get us, or there must be a God and it's divine punishment that I just can't understand. I can't understand the will of God, but he must be right and I'm just stupid. Okay, so none of those things are true in Taoism. There's a old story made up by a man named Alan Watts. And I think it illustrates really well this concept of how to kind of think about, quote, bad things and good things. It goes like this. Once upon a time, there was a Chinese farmer. And one day, that Chinese farmer had his horse run away. Then that evening, all the villagers came around and they said, well, isn't that too bad? And he said, maybe. Well, the next day, the horse came back and brought with it 7 wild stallions. Then in the day, all the villagers came back around and they said, well, isn't that wonderful? And he said, well, maybe. The next day, the farmer's son was trying to tame one of the new wild horses, but he fell off, broke his leg. And the villagers came around and they said, well, isn't that too bad? The farmer said, maybe. Well, the next day, the conscription officers from the military came around and trying to conscript all able-bodied young men to go fight a war. And of course, since the son had a broken leg, he couldn't fight. So the conscription officers let him be and moved on. At the end of the day, all the villagers came around. They said, oh my gosh, that's so amazing. That's how wonderful is that he didn't have to go fight in the war. And the farmer said, well, maybe. So the story is great at illustrating that you cannot define any one action as good or bad actions. They are simply effects. They are reactions to different circumstances. You cannot predict how anything that happens to you or somebody else will affect anything else. And here's another example. Right now, we believe the universe began in the Big Bang, right? About 14 billion years ago. Which means for 14 billion years, cosmic events have been in motion. Dust, gravity, heat, speed of light, black holes, stars forming, collapsing, exploding, forming new planets, forming new stars. Those explode, those collapse. And 14 billion years later, you show up. So think about all the wars that happened just in the last 100 years, right? World War I, World War II, all the European wars, all the wars in Africa or South America or in Asia. Just millions of people vanish. But somehow, even though all those bad, quote unquote, bad things happen, you show up at the moment you do. I mean, is it a tragedy? Yes, obviously, of course it is. But who knows if you'd be here or not, right? Who knows if you'd be here if some comet or asteroid hadn't smacked into the Earth 65 million years ago and wiped out the dominant species on the planet. So millions of creatures die, billions of creatures probably, so that at just that moment, at just this time, at just this day, you're sitting on your phone or your computer listening to me speak from some place at some time. So there's really no way to look at anything and say that this is bad, because you just can't know. You never know. And that may hurt when it's someone you love or someone we care about. It feels counterintuitive, especially in the moment. But telling yourself that you caused this, that they deserved this, or that, some sort of cosmic wrong or right is happening is folly. It's folly. It's just, it'll drive you crazy. It really, really will. All right. Chapter 11. If I can make it flip pages. There we go. Healing. Ah, yes. Much better. Much better than disaster, right? Fire cools. Water seeks its own level. No matter how extreme a situation is, it will change. It cannot continue forever. Thus, a great forest fire is always destined to burn itself out. A turbulent sea will become calmer. Natural events balance themselves out, seeking their opposites. And this process of balance is at the heart of all healing. This process takes time. If an event is not great, the balancing required is slight. If it is monstrous, then it may take days, years, or even lifetimes for things to return to an even keel. Actually, without these slight imbalances, there could be no movement in life. It is being off balance that keeps life changing. Total centering, total balance would only be stasis. All life is continual destruction and healing over and over again. That is why, even in the midst of an extreme situation, the wise are patient. Whether the situation is illness, calamity, or their own anger, they know that healing will follow upheaval. So, I don't have one sitting by me, but the yin yang symbol, we've all seen it. In fact, let me pull one up for you. it looks like this. We talk a lot with the yin yang that it means balance or opposites. And that's true. It does in some regard. But the important part of the yin yang is actually that it is in motion. So most of the time we see the yin yang like this, a static image or on a necklace or a t-shirt or a tattoo. But in reality, yin yang is constantly spinning. Yin never being able to overtake yang, and yang never able to overtake yin. A little bit of yin inside yang, and a little bit of yang inside yin. That's important to note because, as in this chapter, it mentions that healing is always after destruction. There is no destruction without healing, and there is no healing without destruction. If this were not true, as this chapter says, there could be no movement in life. It is only in balance as it moves. So total centering, to quote the last verse in this paragraph here, total centering, total balance would only be stasis. All life is continual destruction and healing over and over again. It never stops. So think back in the destruction chapter where I described the creation of the universe as we know it, the Big Bang. Destruction, creation, new planets, new stars. Those stars grow up, they explode, they collapse into black holes, whatever natural process that creates more stars, more planets, more matter over and over and over and over again. It never ends. It will continue and cycle forever. So that's what this chapter is getting at. When disaster happens, when you feel angry, the wise person knows that this too shall pass, right? Day always comes after night, every single time. If there was no day, there would be no night. If there was no night, there would be no day. We would just be, right? So you have to have one and the other all the time. So even though we can't define circumstances as good and bad, that doesn't mean we don't feel emotions. It doesn't mean we're not sad or angry, and that these emotions are natural. I know some philosophies will teach us that emotions are good and bad, that being angry is something you can do away with, that pain and suffering is something you can escape from. In Taoism, that's not what we believe. In Taoism, we accept that these are natural parts of ourselves, and we feel them deeply. We allow them to come, and then we allow them to go, right? Just like the yin yang turns and is always turning, so too will that emotion come into us and then leave us. We will heal. So there's always healing after suffering, always. And when you're angry, remember that. And it's hard. It's very difficult. I'm quick to anger, very quick to anger. more so than I would like to be. But I know that if I hang on, eventually that anger will fade and happiness will come back. And it does every single time. Okay. On to chapter 12. Shaping. Potter at the wheel, from centering to finished pot. Form increases as options decrease. Softness goes to hardness. When a potter begins to throw a pot, she picks up a lump of clay, shapes it into a rough sphere, and throws it onto the spinning potter's wheel. It may land off-center, and she must carefully begin to shape it until it is a smooth cylinder. Then she works the clay, stretching and compressing it as it turns. First, it is a tower. Then it is like a squat mushroom. Only after bringing it up and down several times does she slowly squeeze the revolving clay until its walls rise from the wheel. She cannot go on too long, for the clay will begin to tire and then sag. She gives it the form she imagines, then sets it aside. The next day, the clay will be leather hard, and she can turn it over to shape the foot. Some decoration may be scratched into the surface. Eventually, the bowl will be fired, and then the only options are the colors applied to it. Its shape cannot be changed. This is how we shape all the situations in our lives. We must give them rough shape and then throw them down into the center of our lives. We must stretch and compress, testing the nature of things. As we shape the situation, we must be aware of what form we want things to take. The closer something comes to completion, the harder and more definite it becomes. Our options become fewer until the full impact of our creation is all that there is. Beauty or ugliness, utility or failure, comes from the process of shaping. All right. You know what I'm reminded of by this chapter? I'm reminded of school projects in groups. You ever done a group project before? I hate group projects. I did not like them. My kids seem not to like them either, because it always feels like you're the only one doing anything, right? Like I was that kid. Like I was the one who, we got into a group of 4 and I was like, okay, here's what we can do. And then if someone needed to do a task that was, really geared towards one person, I was that kid. And I would go and do this hard task, and I'd stay up all night doing this thing. I'd come back and everyone would be like, yeah, it's not as good as I thought it was going to be. I'm like, well, you didn't do it. I did it. Why? Why didn't you volunteer then? That's what this reminds me of. As time goes by, when a situation arises, it's harder to change, isn't it? When things are new, when things are taken care of soon, then they're easier to change if something unexpectedly happens. And that's always the case, right? Nothing ever really goes to plan. So by not procrastinating, if it will, when those unfortunate or unexpected things arise, you can divert course. Think of it like, did you ever build those examples of like a river when you were a kid in like science class? So you'd have like an inclined plane, had some sides on it, and like you had to pour water from like the top of the slide, like down to the bottom of the slide. Do you remember that? And then like, it would leak because like you didn't put the sides on right, or like you made it out of paper, and you have to like quickly go over there and like, like put tape on it or something. So if you take your time and build it slowly, build it methodically, you can check for things before you put the water in. Because once the water's in, that's it. It's just going to go everywhere if you didn't do it right. But if you make your incline, you put one side on it, you put the other side on it, you check it, right? Maybe you use, sand first and check for holes. Maybe you blow down the slide to see if it puffs up or it tears somewhere, right? Then you can pour the water in and it goes out neatly, uniformly, more in such a way that you expected, right? More in line with your expectations, right? And I know that's kind of maybe a childish example, but I've been there. I've been, at my job, and we have this project to do, and you just put it off, right? It's a hard project, and you don't want to do it. It's going to be a lot of work, and so you just kind of go through your days, and I don't know what it is. You just don't want to do it, But eventually, it just kind of sneaks up on you, and now you're like, okay, well, I've got 8 hours until this is due, and I'm going to have to just hurry through it. And you didn't have time to check. You didn't have time to revise. You didn't ask questions that you needed to. You missed things, and then it's too late, right? So that's really what this chapter is kind of getting at, is that just like a potter, you have to take your time. You have to form it. You have to do it one step at a time. You don't rush things, right? You can't just go around rushing through things, or you'll make mistakes, or you'll forget things. And that, as we saw earlier, has consequences. Everything has consequences, right? And if you want the consequences to be in such a way that goes along with your expectations, one step at a time, mindful of what you're doing in all things, and then at the end, maybe your circumstances will become a beautiful pot. All right. Chapter 13, Absorption. Crimson light through pine shadows, setting sun settling in the ocean. Night follows the setting sun, day follows the fleeting moon. All too often, we tend to think of absorption as a static thing. Water is absorbed into a sponge, and there it stays. But true absorption is a total involvement in the evolution of life without hesitation or contradiction. In nature, there is no alienation. Everything belongs. Only human beings hold ourselves aloof from this process. We have our civilization, our personal plans, our own petty emotions. We divorce ourselves from process, even as we yearn for love, companionship, understanding, and communion. We constantly defeat ourselves by questioning, asserting ourselves at the wrong times, or letting hatred and pride cloud our perceptions. Our alienation is self-generated. In the meantime, all of nature continues its constant flow. We need to let ourselves go, enter freely into the process of nature, and become absorbed in it. If we integrate ourselves with that process, we will find success. Then the sequence of things will be as evident as the coming of the sun and the moon, and everything will be as it should be. Okay. This goes back to the yin yang. Have you ever felt that you were all alone? Maybe you're sitting in your room. Maybe you're sitting outside. Maybe you're at a restaurant by yourself and you just think, man, I'm all alone. I feel like nothing I do matters. And I could just disappear forever and nobody would care. Nobody would mind. Nobody would notice. So that is the alienation feeling that this chapter is getting at. We as humans have this very interesting ability to disconnect or disassociate ourselves from really everything that's going on around us, right? Like, have you ever been to a party and there's like 100 people in this room and you're like just standing there and nobody's talking to you and you're not talking to anybody? So there's this whole room with all this craziness going on and you just feel totally alone, right? That's the alienation it's getting at, right? It is a very human kind of mental gymnastics, right? But as we've seen earlier, we are as much a part of nature as anything, as the person over there to your left, as this Superman coffee mug, right? As this microphone, or you sitting somewhere, anywhere, wherever you are. We are all connected. Because, as we've seen earlier, that yin yang, there is nothing outside of it. Bring it back up here, you guys. Right? And it spins forever, constantly. So as this chapter says, in nature, there is no alienation. Everything belongs. You know, it's funny that in science, we have learned that when you look deep into really anything, it all starts to look the same. One atom, a nucleus, an electron, they're on everything. So at the atomic level, they're, besides maybe the number of electrons, the number of protons, they're all protons. They're all electrons and quarks and everything inside there. It's eerily similar, right? So why is it that as we zoom out into this level, that now we feel disconnected, right? Like I can touch this cup, right? I am not this cup. This cup did not absorb me. I did not absorb this cup. But at a smaller level, I did, right? Like I can sit here and rub the edge of this cup and remove this cup. And some of those atoms are now here. So I know that's a small example, but it's important to remember that we are all connected. We are all breathing the same air. The air molecules that I breathe out, the carbon dioxide, will float into the air, could be absorbed by a tree, which eats it, puts out oxygen. Maybe you breathe in that oxygen. Maybe a gust of wind picks it up and carries it far, far away. And maybe a tree by you or a plant by you, and then you breathe it. right? These are not scientific impossibilities, however unlikely or small the chances may be. When I am dead, my body will go probably into the ground, into the soil, and that soil will continue to grow, will provide nutrients for animals, plants, and those plants and animals will go on to provide nutrients for somebody else, just as the food that I have eaten, as kind of macabre as it may sound, there is probably maybe some form of human energy left from somebody else. You never know, right? It's only at this level, this quick time we're alive, that we feel that we can trick ourselves into thinking we are disconnected. But the truth is that's far from the truth, right? We are in one process that always turns over, right? We cannot disconnect ourselves from it. We cannot reject it. It is who we are. This is who we all are. And that connects us. So the next time you're sitting in your room or wherever, and you feel that loneliness start to set in, don't. Try and remind yourself that we are all connected in a very real sense, not spiritual, not metaphysical, in a physical, scientifically accurate sense. We are all connected forever. We always will be. All right, we're going to do one more. Positioning. You know what? We're not going to do one more. We will do positioning next week. Since I was having some technical difficulties, we kind of jumped right into chapters. So we're going to close off by talking a little bit more about the Taoist Online. So I am the chief editor and founder of the Taoist Online. The organization is who runs these streams. We publish about 20 articles a day on religion, philosophy, spirituality, personal journeys. You can find all of our articles at thedaoistonline.org or the Medium publication version at thedaoist.online. Taoist with a T, by the way. Just recently this week, we launched a big push into the community. We really want to give back to everything we've gotten so far. So we have a number of free downloads you can get. You can join our Discord server. We've got a bunch of artwork you can have. One of our editors, Nani, made a digital calendar, which is amazing. Thank you so much, Nani, for making that. We also have ways to give back if you would like to financially support us through donations. You can either subscribe for $2.99 to our Discord server, and you receive a plethora of extra goodies, or you can just make a one-time donation at that coffee link down there at the bottom of your screen, and we'll send you an email with all the extra goodies, whether that's merch that is not available to anybody else, pre-release merch, extra artwork that we withhold just for supporters. You can be involved in our what's called the VIP Lounge on our Discord server. So you can talk to me, you can talk to the editing team, you can watch kind of how we work behind the scenes. So it's like behind the scenes access of a publication, which is great. That room is amazing. There's always someone in there, and we talk about all kinds of things. It gets really fun. So I hope that you stop by the website, thedaoistonline.org, and if you could, please make a donation. We'd really appreciate it. All the money in the donations goes back to our editing team and our writers in the form of tips. Cool. All right. Well, I appreciate you guys stopping by this week. I'll be here next week, as every Sunday at 10 a.m. Central Time, hopefully on time next time with no forgetting of pushing buttons. And I'll see you guys next time. Thank you very much. Bye.